It is 3:14 a.m. at a greasy diner called the Rusty Griddle. The air smells heavy with old oil. Shaq sits squeezed into a tiny corner booth. He stopped by after a late flight. He just wanted $14.50 ribs to remember his old home in Newark. Suddenly, a young girl named Junie walks up. Her old coat is faded and worn out. The fabric is wrinkled, dirty, and frayed at the sleeves. She stares at his leftover fries. "Sir, can I finish this?" she asks. Right away, the manager, Silas, rushes over. He yells at her for ruining his fancy shop. Silas has no idea who the giant in the $5 t-shirt really is. Shaq quietly looks down at a paper on the floor. It is Junie's unpaid bill for $1,280. Now, a journey to protect her dignity begins. He must face the cold rules of the city. Can this giant's silence defeat their greed? The booth creaked every time Shaq shifted his weight. His knees pressed hard against the table. He had learned to fold himself small a long time ago. Big men learn that trick early. You bend so nobody feels crowded. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and old grease. A ceiling fan spun slow above the counter. It clicked once every turn, like a tired clock. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past on wet asphalt. Rain had come and gone an hour earlier. Shaq wore a gray shirt, with a small hole near the collar. His cap sat low over his eyes. Nobody in the diner looked at him twice. That was exactly how he liked it. He picked up a fry and chewed it slow. His mind drifted back to Newark, 1982. His mother, Lucille, used to count coins on the kitchen table. She would line them up in careful rows. Some nights, the rows barely reached $1. She never complained out loud. She just kept counting. Young Shaq used to sit across from her, legs too long for the chair, watching her sort pennies from nickels. He remembered asking her once why she counted so slowly. She told him money deserved respect, even when there wasn't much of it. He never forgot that lesson. He carried it into every diner, every hotel lobby, every quiet corner of his life since. Back then, the apartment had one bare bulb hanging in the kitchen. It flickered sometimes, and Lucille would tap it gently, like coaxing a stubborn friend. Shaq used to think that bulb was magic, the way it always came back on for her. Years later, he understood it wasn't magic at all. It was patience, plain and simple, the same patience she poured into everything else. Shaq remembered the smell of her kitchen, grease and onions, and something sweet underneath. That smell followed him everywhere, even now. It found him tonight in a diner 3,000 miles from home. He looked at his own hands. They were huge, cracked at the knuckles, scarred from decades of contact. Basketball did that to a man. So did life. Then he saw her hands. Junie's fingers were thin and pale from the cold. They trembled slightly as she pointed at his plate. She was maybe 11 years old. Her sneakers had holes at the toes. "Sir, can I finish this?" she asked again, quieter this time. Shaq didn't answer right away. He just slid the plate 2 inches closer to her side of the table. That was when Silas came running. Silas was the night manager, thin as a broom handle, with slicked back hair. He wore a name tag that said manager in bold red letters. He grabbed Junie by the sleeve of her coat. "We do not beg in my restaurant," Silas snapped. His voice was sharp and cold. "Get out before I call the police." Junie flinched. She pulled her arm back and looked at the floor. A folded paper slipped from her coat pocket. It landed near Shaq's boot. Silas didn't even glance at Shaq. To him, Shaq was just another tired trucker in a $5 t-shirt. Big men in cheap clothes were invisible in a place like this. Shaq bent down, slow and careful, and picked up the paper. He unfolded it under the dim ceiling light. It was a notice. Cold, official language filled the page. Pyramid Asset Management had sent it. The amount owed was $1,280.83. At the bottom, in red letters, it said, "Final notice of eviction." Shaq read the number twice. He looked up at Junie. She was already backing toward the door. Her eyes were wet, and her jaw was tight, the kind of pride that refuses to cry in public. He knew that pride. He had seen it on his mother's face 100 times. Junie pushed the diner door open. The bell above it jingled, thin and small against the night. She stepped out, into the cold, without looking back. Shaq stayed in his booth a moment longer. He folded the eviction notice once and slid it into his pocket. Then he stood up and the whole booth seemed to sigh with relief. He walked outside. The night air was sharp and smelled like rain on concrete. Junie was sitting on the curb, hugging her knees, staring at nothing. Shaq didn't say anything at first. He just stood a few feet away, giving her room to breathe. He had learned that lesson too, a long time ago. Some people need space before they need words. "That paper," he said finally. His voice was low and steady. "That yours?" Junie looked up, startled that he had followed her. She nodded once, slow, like admitting it hurt. "My mom's sick," she said. "She can't work right now. The building people want their money by Friday." Shaq crouched down, which took effort given his size, until he was closer to her eye level. "Friday," he repeated. "They'll put our stuff on the street," Junie said. Her voice cracked on the word street. She wiped her nose with her sleeve. "Everybody just watches. Nobody ever helps." Shaq felt something tighten in his chest. It was a feeling he recognized from childhood, watching his mother open bills she couldn't pay. Back then, he had been too small to do anything. Tonight, he wasn't small anymore. Still, he hesitated. He had learned, painfully, that throwing money at a problem could make it worse. Money without respect just becomes another kind of insult. He almost reached for his wallet. $2,000, quick and quiet, then back into the night. Nobody would ever know. But then he noticed something on her wrist. A thin white scar ran along the inside of her forearm. It looked old, healed wrong, the kind of mark that comes from machine work, not an accident. Junie caught him looking and pulled her sleeve down fast. "Sewing job," she muttered. "Off the books. $3 an hour. Machine caught me once." "Does it still hurt?" Shaq asked quietly. Junie shook her head fast, too fast. "No, it's fine. I don't even notice it anymore." Shaq didn't push further. He recognized that answer too. It was the same answer his mother used to give when someone asked if her feet hurt after standing all day. Some pain gets folded up and put away. That way it stops taking room from everything else. He noticed the way Junie kept glancing back toward the diner. She looked worried her seat might get taken by someone who needed it more. That kind of worry didn't belong to an 11-year-old. It belonged to grown adults carrying grown burdens. Somehow, life had handed it to her early. Shaq said nothing for a long moment. He understood then that money alone would never fix this. Junie didn't need a stranger's cash. She needed her dignity handed back to her, whole. He stood up slowly, joints popping in the cold. "Come back inside," he said. "Sit with me. Order whatever you want." Junie hesitated. "The manager will kick me out again." "No," Shaq said. His voice didn't rise, but something in it settled the matter. "He won't." They walked back toward the diner door together. Junie stayed a full step behind him, unsure if this stranger could really change anything. Shaq pulled the door open and held it for her. The bell jingled again, softer this time. Inside, Silas spotted them immediately. His face twisted with irritation. He came around the counter fast, wiping his hands on his apron like he was preparing for a fight. "I told that girl to leave," Silas said, pointing a finger at Junie. "This is a respectable establishment." Shaq walked to the counter, moving with unhurried calm. He set down a folded napkin, then placed something small underneath it. Nobody could see what it was yet. "I'd like 50 orders of ribs to go," Shaq said. "And she's eating with me tonight." Silas blinked, caught off guard. 50 orders? "Sir, this isn't 50, Shaq repeated. "And a hot meal for her, right now." A few night shift truckers at the counter turned to watch. One of them, an older man in a faded flannel jacket, leaned over to his friend and whispered something. Word was already starting to move through the diner like static electricity. Outside, a semi-truck idled in the parking lot, its engine humming low under the streetlight. Inside, coffee cups sat half full and forgotten. Customers turned their attention toward the counter. Even the jukebox in the corner, stuck on the same faded country song for years, seemed to fade into the background. Dolores, the waitress, wiped down a nearby table twice, without really cleaning it. She just wanted a reason to stay close and listen. She had worked here long enough to know when something important was about to happen. Tonight had that feeling, thick in the air like the smell of old grease. Silas straightened his shoulders, trying to reclaim some authority. "We don't serve loiterers here. Company policy." "She's not loitering," Shaq said. "She's my guest." The words landed heavier than Shaq intended, and the whole diner seemed to notice. Silas's eyes narrowed. Something about this stranger's calm was starting to unsettle him, though he couldn't say exactly why. An old dishwasher named Barnaby stood near the kitchen doorway, drying a plate slowly. He was 72 years old, with tired eyes that had seen decades of shift changes and broken promises. He watched the whole scene without a word. Barnaby had worked at the rusty griddle longer than anyone. He knew things about this diner that Silas didn't want spoken aloud. He shuffled a little closer, pretending to wipe down the counter near Shaq's booth. "Careful, friend," Barnaby whispered, barely moving his lips. "Silas has a piece of the company that owns her building. Pyramid asset. He gets a cut every time they push somebody out." Shaq's jaw tightened, just slightly. He gave no other reaction. Stillness, he reminded himself. Answer, don't react. Barnaby shuffled back to the kitchen before Silas noticed the exchange. Junie slid into the booth across from Shaq, still wary, still watching the door like she expected trouble to walk through it. A waitress named Dolores brought over 2 plates of ribs, her hands shaking slightly from nerves. She set them down, without a word, and hurried away. The diner had gone strangely quiet, except for the hum of the ceiling fan. Junie picked up her fork, but didn't eat right away. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You don't even know me." Shaq looked at her for a long moment. "Somebody did this for my mom once," he said. "Small thing. Changed everything." Junie studied his face, trying to read something there. "Who are you?" "Just a man passing through," Shaq said quietly. That answer didn't satisfy her, but she let it go. She was too hungry, too tired, too cold to keep pushing. She ate slowly at first, then faster, like her body had forgotten what a full meal felt like. Silas watched from behind the counter, arms crossed, jaw clenched. He picked up the diner's landline phone and dialed a number he clearly knew by heart. He turned his back and spoke low, but the tension in his shoulders told everyone something was wrong. "Reginald, it's Silas," he said into the receiver. "We've got a situation at the diner. Some giant is stirring things up with the eviction girl." On the other end, Reginald Prescott, the diner's actual owner, sat up straighter in his leather chair at home. He was a man who had built his fortune buying distressed properties and squeezing every last dollar from struggling tenants. He didn't like surprises, especially not ones involving publicity. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Reginald said, already reaching for his coat. Back at the diner, the tension had spread to every corner of the room. A trucker named Hank leaned toward his buddy and muttered, "Something's not right about that manager." Another customer, an older woman named Peggy, shook her head disapprovingly at Silas's behavior. Not everyone was on Shaq's side, though. A businessman near the window, annoyed by the commotion, muttered that beggars shouldn't be encouraged. The diner had split quietly into 2 camps, though nobody said so out loud. Junie noticed the whispers and shrank a little in her seat. "Maybe I should just go," she said softly. "Stay," Shaq said. His voice was calm but firm. "You didn't do anything wrong." 20 minutes later, the diner's front door swung open hard, the bell clattering against the glass. Reginald Prescott walked in wearing a tailored coat that looked absurdly expensive next to the diner's cracked vinyl booths. 2 large men in dark jackets flanked him like bodyguards. Reginald's eyes swept the room until they landed on Shaq. He smirked, taking in the plain t-shirt, the worn cap, the scuffed boots. "You must be the troublemaker," Reginald said, his tone dripping with amusement. "Funny. I expected someone a little more impressive." Shaq didn't stand up. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at Reginald with an expression that gave nothing away. "This girl owes my company $1,280, Reginald continued, gesturing toward Junie. "Her family has been dodging payment for months. I think it's time we called the police and settled this properly." "She's eating dinner," Shaq said. "That's all that's happening here." Reginald laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Sir, I don't know who you think you are, but you're interfering with a legal matter. I'd hate for you to get arrested alongside her." At that exact moment, the diner door opened again. 2 police officers walked in, responding to Silas's earlier call about a disturbance. The younger officer, barely out of the academy, looked nervous. The older one, a veteran named Officer Miller, scanned the room, with practiced calm. "We got a call about trouble here," Officer Miller said. "Somebody want to explain?" Reginald jumped in immediately. "This man is harassing my staff and encouraging a minor to solicit money from customers. I want him removed." Officer Miller turned to Shaq. "Sir, can I see some ID?" Shaq didn't reach for his wallet right away. Instead, he looked directly at the officer. "You got kids, Officer Miller?" The question caught Miller off guard. "I've got a daughter," he said slowly. "Why?" "Then you know what it looks like when a kid's scared for a good reason," Shaq said. "Not scared of getting in trouble. Scared of losing the only home she's got." The diner had gone completely silent. Even the ceiling fan seemed to click slower. Miller glanced at Junie, who was gripping her fork so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. He looked back at Shaq, something shifting behind his eyes. "I still need to see some ID, sir," Miller said, though his voice had softened. Shaq reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. As he handed over his license, the younger officer's eyes drifted downward towards Shaq's boots. Size 23, custom made, unmistakable to anyone who followed basketball even casually. The young officer's mouth fell open slightly. He tapped Miller's arm and whispered something. Miller looked at the ID in his hand, then back up at Shaq's face, and his expression changed completely. "You're," Miller started, then stopped himself, professional instinct kicking back in. Words seemed to ripple through the diner like a current. Dolores gasped near the coffee machine. Hank the trucker sat up straight, eyes wide. Even Peggy covered her mouth with one hand. Reginald's smirk faltered for the first time all night. That's not possible," he muttered. Shaq stood up fully then, unfolding to his complete height, and the entire diner seemed to shrink around him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I've got a lawyer on the phone," Shaq said, holding up his cell. "He's been listening this whole time. He tells me Pyramid Asset Management has 3 open complaints for illegal eviction practices this year alone." Reginald's face went pale. "Those complaints were dismissed," he said quickly, too quickly. "2 were dismissed," Shaq said calmly. "1 wasn't. And now there's a 4th, filed tonight, with a diner full of witnesses." Silas, standing near the register, suddenly looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. His earlier confidence had evaporated completely. Reginald's bodyguards shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for a public relations disaster instead of a simple removal. Reginald tried a different approach, his voice turning smooth and persuasive. "Look," he said, "there's clearly been a misunderstanding. Perhaps we can discuss this privately. I'm sure we can work something out that benefits everyone." "I don't do private deals," Shaq said. "Not for things that should have been public all along." Reginald's jaw tightened. He glanced at the police officers, hoping for some kind of support, but Officer Miller simply crossed his arms and waited. "This is extortion," Reginald snapped, his composure cracking. "You can't just threaten my business because you're some kind of celebrity." "Nobody's threatening anything," Shaq said. "I'm just paying attention. Something you should try sometime." Silas, sensing the ground shifting beneath him, suddenly rushed forward. "Mr. O'Neill, sir, I had no idea. Please, I was just following the owner's instructions." "You knew exactly what you were doing," Shaq said, his tone flat and final. "You knew about her building. You knew about the eviction. You still called the police on a hungry kid." Silas dropped to his knees right there on the diner floor, his hands clasped together. "Please, I'll lose my job. I have a family too." Shaq looked down at him, without anger, but without softness either. "Everybody's got a family, Silas. That's exactly the point you keep missing." The temptation to unleash real fury sat right there in Shaq's chest, hot and immediate. He had every right to crush this man's career with a single phone call. Instead, he chose something harder. He chose stillness. "Answer, don't react," he reminded himself silently. Officer Miller cleared his throat. "Mr. Prescott, given what's been shared tonight, we're going to need you to come down to the station, just to sort out some questions about these complaints." Reginald's bodyguards exchanged uneasy glances, but made no move to intervene. Reginald's face had gone from pale to red, humiliation replacing his earlier arrogance. "This isn't over," Reginald muttered, though the threat sounded hollow now. "It is for tonight," Officer Miller said, gesturing toward the door. As Reginald was escorted out, he shot one last glare at Shaq, but Shaq didn't even look up. He had already turned his attention back to Junie, who was staring at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. "You're really him," she whispered. "The basketball guy? From TV?" Shaq gave a small nod. "Nothing more." "Why didn't you just say so from the start?" Junie asked. "Would it have changed anything?" Shaq asked back. "Would the ribs have tasted better?" Junie almost smiled, the first hint of one all night. "Maybe." Shaq sat back down across from her. "Your mom," he said. "She's home right now?" Junie's smile faded instantly. "She's sick. Really sick. We don't have money for her medicine." Shaq's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened with purpose. "Let's go see her." Outside, the rain had started again, light and steady, tapping against the diner's windows. A car pulled up quietly at the curb. A driver sat behind the wheel, a man who worked for Shaq, but rarely spoke first. Shaq helped Junie into the back seat. They drove through streets that grew darker and more broken with every passing block. Streetlights flickered or didn't work at all. Junie stared out the window silently, gripping the door handle like it might disappear. The red brick apartment building appeared eventually, sagging under decades of neglect. Paint peeled from the walls in long strips. A broken window on the second floor had been covered with cardboard and duct tape. A single street lamp buzzed weakly near the entrance. It cast a thin orange glow across cracked front steps. Someone had left a child's bicycle chained to the railing. Its tires were flat. Its frame had rusted from years of rain. A stray cat darted across the sidewalk and disappeared beneath the porch. Somewhere above, a window air conditioner rattled loudly, fighting a losing battle against the summer heat. Shaq stepped out of the car slowly. He took in the building the way he took in most things, quietly and without judgment. He had seen buildings like this before, in Newark, in a dozen other cities. They all carried the same tired weight. They held up families who deserved better than what the walls could offer them. Inside, the hallway smelled like mildew and old smoke. Junie led Shaq up 2 flights of stairs, past doors with peeling numbers, and one that had been kicked in and never repaired. Her apartment was small, barely more than a single room, with a curtain dividing the sleeping area. Junie's mother, a thin woman named Rosalind, lay on a worn mattress, wrapped in blankets despite the warm night. A single fan buzzed in the corner of the room. It pushed warm air around, without really cooling anything. A stack of unpaid bills sat on a small table by the door, held down by an empty water glass. A faded photograph of Junie, as a baby hung crooked on the wall above the mattress. Rosalind's skin looked pale, almost gray, sweat beading on her forehead. She stirred when the door opened, her eyes struggling to focus. "Junie," she whispered. "Who's that with you?" "Mom, it's okay," Junie said, rushing to her side. "He's helping us." Shaq crouched beside the mattress, careful not to loom over her. "Ma'am, I'm going to get you some help tonight. Real help." Rosalind's eyes filled with tears, though she seemed too weak to argue or question anything. "We don't have insurance," she murmured. "The hospital already turned us away twice." Shaq pulled out his phone and made a call, his voice low and businesslike. Within minutes, an ambulance had been arranged, along with instructions to a private clinic that wouldn't ask about payment first. While they waited, Shaq made a second call. This one lasted longer, filled with numbers and legal terms that Junie didn't fully understand. She only caught fragments. The entire building, 2.4 million, wire transfer tonight. "What's happening?" Junie asked, once he'd hung up. "I just bought your building," Shaq said simply. "The red brick belongs to somebody who actually cares now." Junie stared at him, stunned into silence. "You can't just buy a building in one phone call." "I just did," Shaq said. There was no boasting in his voice, only quiet fact. The ambulance arrived soon after, paramedics moving Rosalind carefully onto a stretcher. She reached for Junie's hand as they wheeled her out, tears streaming down both their faces, though these tears felt different now. Relief mixed with disbelief. Shaq followed the ambulance in his car, Junie sitting silently beside him, still processing everything that had happened in the last few hours. The city outside blurred past, streetlights reflecting off wet pavement. At the clinic, doctors moved quickly once they understood the situation. Rosalind needed surgery, an operation that would cost $45,600 without insurance. Shaq had already arranged payment before the doctors finished explaining the diagnosis. "She's going to be okay," a doctor told Junie a few hours later, exhaustion evident in her voice, but relief clear on her face. "The surgery went well. She just needs rest now." The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee from a machine in the corner. A television bolted to the wall played the news with no sound. Subtitles scrolled too fast to read. A vending machine hummed nearby, half its buttons broken, half its snacks sold out. Junie collapsed into a waiting room chair, the weight of the entire night finally catching up with her. Shaq sat beside her, not saying much, just present, the way a mountain is present, without demanding attention. "Why are you doing all this?" Junie asked again, quieter this time. Shaq thought for a long moment before answering. "When I was young, my mom counted pennies on our kitchen table. Nobody ever helped her. I promised myself, if I ever could, I'd help somebody the way nobody helped her." Junie wiped her eyes. "That's really sad." "It was," Shaq admitted. "But it made me who I am. Every hard thing does that, if you let it." The sun began rising outside the clinic windows, pale orange light spilling across the waiting room floor. Junie watched it for a while, feeling something inside her shift, like a door opening, after years of being stuck. Back at the rusty griddle, morning brought changes nobody expected. A new sign had been installed overnight, replacing the old one. It now read, "Barnaby's Kitchen," in simple, warm lettering. Barnaby stood outside, staring up at the sign, with tears in his eyes. After 30 years of being overlooked, he had been named the new manager, a decision Shaq had made, before dawn with a single phone call. Barnaby ran a hand along the fresh paint of the sign, like he was checking it was real. 30 years of scrubbing dishes had left calluses across his palms. He had stopped noticing them a long time ago. Nobody had ever asked what he wanted from this place. Somebody finally had. He thought about all the nights he watched other people get promoted around him. They were younger, louder, quicker to speak up in meetings. He never resented them for it. He just quietly kept doing his job. He believed that someday, somehow, it would matter. This morning, it finally did. Silas, meanwhile, hadn't been fired outright. Instead, Shaq had arranged something different, something that felt more like justice than punishment. Silas would now work in the kitchen, under Barnaby's supervision, learning every task from the ground up. "You'll wash dishes for the first month," Barnaby told Silas, that morning, not unkindly, but firmly. "Then we'll see if you remember what respect looks like." Silas nodded, humbled in a way that felt permanent rather than performative. For the first time in years, he understood what it felt like to be at the bottom, looking up. Reginald Prescott's troubles, meanwhile, were only beginning. The complaint filed, that night, combined with the 3 previous ones, triggered a formal investigation into Pyramid Asset Management's practices. Documents began surfacing, revealing years of illegal eviction tactics targeting vulnerable tenants across the city. Reginald wouldn't go to prison immediately, but his business empire began crumbling. Within weeks, contracts canceled, partnerships dissolved, his name dragged through local news reports. The consequences were slow, procedural, and thorough, exactly the kind of justice that mattered more than headlines. City inspectors, prompted by the new complaints, began visiting other properties owned by Pyramid Asset Management. They found broken heating systems, unsafe wiring, and mold hidden behind fresh paint jobs. Tenants who had stayed silent for years, afraid of retaliation, finally started speaking up. They spoke one after another, like dominoes finally allowed to fall. A week later, Junie sat in a small office downtown, signing paperwork alongside a lawyer Shaq had hired specifically for her family. The red brick building, now under new ownership, had all outstanding debts cleared for every tenant inside. Rosalind, recovering steadily, sat beside her daughter, color returning to her cheeks for the first time in months. A social worker had also connected them with a scholarship program, one that would cover Junie's education completely, all the way through college. The lawyer's office had tall windows overlooking the busy street below. Sunlight fell across the paperwork spread out on the table between them. Junie kept touching the edge of the pages, as if checking they were really hers to keep. The scholarship fund had a name attached to it, something Junie noticed while reviewing the documents. It was called the Lucille Fund, named after a woman Junie had never met, but somehow felt connected to. "Who's Lucille?" Junie asked, looking up at Shaq, who stood quietly near the door. "My mother," Shaq said. "She never got chances like this. So now, other kids get to have them instead." Junie's eyes filled with tears again, though these were different from the ones she'd cried at the diner. These felt like relief finding a permanent home. Weeks passed, and life at the Red Brick slowly transformed. Fresh paint covered walls that had been cracked and peeling for years. Broken windows were replaced. The hallway that once smelled like mildew now smelled like fresh paint and possibility. The street lamp outside got fixed too. It hummed steady now instead of flickering. Someone cleared the rusted bicycle from the railing. In its place sat a small row of potted plants. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact in the hallway started nodding hello. Soon they were stopping to talk. Eventually, they started knocking on each other's doors just to check in. A community bulletin board appeared near the entrance. It was filled with notices about a new after-school program and a Saturday food co-op. None of it was flashy. All of it mattered. Small repairs, done consistently, had a way of restoring more than just the walls. They restored the sense that somebody, somewhere, actually cared what happened here. Junie returned to Barnaby's kitchen one afternoon, this time not to beg for leftovers, but simply to say hello. Barnaby greeted her with a warm smile, sliding a hot meal across the counter without being asked. "On the house," he said, winking. "Always will be for you." Silas, working quietly in the back, glanced up and gave a small, awkward nod. It wasn't friendship yet, but it was something closer to respect, something that hadn't existed before that night. His hands, once soft from years behind a register, had started to blister from scrubbing pots the old way. Barnaby never scolded him for the slow pace. He simply showed him again and again, patient in a way Silas didn't feel he deserved. Slowly, something in Silas began to loosen. It was like a fist finally unclenching after holding tight for too long. Shaq visited one more time, before disappearing from the neighborhood entirely, blending back into the anonymous crowd he always preferred. He sat in his car outside the Red Brick, watching through the rearview mirror as Junie laughed with a group of kids near the entrance. She was holding a hot meal container, sharing it freely with two younger children who clearly had less than she once did. The cycle Shaq had broken for her was already becoming something she passed forward herself. He started the engine and pulled away slowly, merging into the early morning traffic. Nobody on the street recognized the giant behind the wheel. That was exactly how he preferred it. The radio in his car played something soft and low, a station he never remembered choosing. Rain had stopped completely now, leaving the streets slick and shining under the early sun. A few joggers moved along the sidewalk, breath visible in the cool morning air. Newark felt a little further away that morning, though its lessons never really left him. His mother's voice echoed quietly in his memory, the same words she used to whisper while counting coins at their kitchen table. "Take care of people," she used to say, even when nobody's watching, especially then. Shaq drove on. Behind him, he left a diner with a new name. He left a building full of new hope. He left a girl who now understood something important. Dignity, once restored, has a way of multiplying far beyond where it started. Behind him, Newark's echo faded into the noise of the city. Ahead, the road stretched on, quiet and unremarkable, exactly the way Shaq liked it best.